They thought they'd found another barren world. Then the signal came through in perfect galactic English. The Luminara crew's routine survey turned into a nightmare when armed humans surrounded their shuttle with one command: power down or be destroyed. This wasn't first contact, it was a detention operation. What they discovered about this lost colony would rewrite everything the Confederation knew about human expansion. The Luminara drifted through another dead system, her crew moving through routines worn smooth by 57 identical surveys. Commander Vine maintained the posture of command, but his eyes held the glassy look of a man counting down shifts. Science Officer Xerox ran redundant scans anyway, his fingers tapping console panels with restless energy. He knew the protocols called for minimum effort on these milk runs, but something in him refused to accept the emptiness. Between them, the tension of Drax and Neri played out in muttered exchanges across the bridge. Drax handled navigation with board precision, each course correction executed without looking up from his displays. Neri monitored communications, her screen showing the flat lines of dead airwaves. Their professional friction masked something deeper, the slow erosion of purpose that comes from too much silence, too much nothing. This wasn't exploration. Exploration implied discovery, risk, the thrill of the unknown. This was galactic paperwork. The Confederation designed these survey routes to be safe, predictable corridors between points of interest. They mapped dead rocks and cold stars, filing reports that would be reviewed by nobody. Each planet scan returned the same data. No atmosphere, no biosignatures, no mineral value. The ship's logs filled with identical entries world after world. Then Neri's console lit up. Not with the usual blank readings, but with energy signatures that defied the system's profile. Low-level power emissions structured, repeating. She leaned forward, her professional disdain replaced by sharp focus. "I'm getting something," she said, her voice cutting through the bridge's hum. Before Vine could request confirmation, before Xerox could demand data, a voice crackled through the comms. Clear, sharp, speaking standard galactic English with military precision. "Unidentified vessel. You have entered restricted space. Maintain your current position and prepare for inspection." The boredom shattered. Vine straightened in his command chair, protocols flooding back to him. Xerox abandoned his scans, hands hovering over new calculations. Drax's fingers froze above his navigation controls. They had expected many things from first contact: curiosity, wonder, perhaps even fear. They had not expected to be challenged in their own language by a voice that held no welcome, only warning. This wasn't the discovery they had trained for. This was something else entirely. Something that should not exist, speaking words that should not be heard in this dead quadrant of space. The Luminara hung motionless, her crew suddenly aware that their milk run had just become something far more dangerous. The shuttle descended through thin atmosphere, its landing protocols activated by Commander Vine's steady command. Xerox monitored the surface readings, expecting signs of civilization, perhaps even the welcoming party Confederation first contact scenarios described. What they found instead were tactical formations and defensive emplacements forming around their landing site before their thrusters finished cooling. Human voices came through the comms again, this time with enhanced clarity and undeniable threat assessment. "Unidentified craft. You are surrounded by Artemis Defense Force personnel. Exit with hands visible and weapons stowed. Any deviation from these instructions will be met with lethal force." The words carried no curiosity. No wonder at alien contact, only the hardened certainty of soldiers maintaining a perimeter. Armed humans in gray tactical gear emerged from concealed positions, their weapons trained on the shuttle's hatch. Their movements showed practiced coordination, each soldier covering specific angles without verbal communication. Drax counted 12 visible combatants before Vine ordered the hatch open. The Confederation crew stepped out into thin, cold air, their hands raised in universal surrender posture. Vine began the standard first contact greeting. "We come in peace from the Galactic Confederation. Our mission is—" A sharp gesture from the lead soldier cut him off. The man's face remained impassive behind his visor, his weapon never wavering from center mass. "Save it for processing. Move to the marked transport. Keep your hands where we can see them." Xerox started to protest. "We are diplomatic envoys, not prisoners. There are protocols for—" The nearest soldier adjusted his aim slightly, the weapon's power cell humming with activation. "You're in our airspace. Our protocols apply. Move. They were herded into a ground transport with reinforced plating and no interior handles. The vehicle moved through a landscape of hardened structures and defensive placements. Watchtowers dotted the terrain, their mounted weapons tracking the transport's progress. The colony showed none of the expansion patterns of peaceful settlement. Every structure appeared designed for defense, every road laid for rapid military movement. The processing facility confirmed their status. Fingerprint scanners, retinal scans, DNA collection, standard prisoner intake procedures. Vine maintained his composure, continuing to reference Confederation diplomatic statutes. The human guards worked with efficient disinterest, their responses limited to necessary commands. Remove your outer layers. Place personal effects in the container. Proceed to Cell 3. Xerox observed the facility's operations with growing unease. The humans operated with the calm precision of those who had processed unknowns before. Their equipment showed wear from repeated use, their procedures refined through practice. This wasn't emergency protocol, this was routine. Drax muttered to Vine as they were separated into individual cells. They're not afraid of us. They're assessing a threat. The cell doors closed with heavy finality, their magnetic seals engaging with a solid thump. Through the reinforced observation window, Xerox watched two guards take up positions outside. Their posture suggested long watch shifts, their attention never wandering from their prisoners. The Confederation's first contact manual contained procedures for cultural misunderstandings, for language barriers, for technological disparities. It offered no guidance for when your rescuers treated you as hostile combatants from the moment of arrival. The Artemis colony had turned first contact into a military operation, and the Luminara crew had become its latest subjects. Xerox found his opening when the guard shifted attention to a perimeter alert. The science officer's restraints were designed for human prisoners, not Confederation physiology. A subtle twist of his wrist disengaged the locking mechanism with minimal sound. The terminal in the observation room stood unattended, its screen still glowing with the guard's unfinished report. Xerox's fingers moved across the interface, bypassing security protocols with techniques the Artemis colony couldn't anticipate. The archives opened like a wound. Generation ship Artemis launched from Earth orbital dock 3 centuries earlier. 5,000 colonists in cryo-sleep destination. Promised world TRAPPIST-1E. Earth's record showed the vessel lost after a navigation anomaly during routine course correction. Official conclusion: catastrophic failure, all hands presumed lost. The Confederation's historical databases contained the same final entry, another tragic footnote in human expansion. But the Artemis hadn't exploded. It had drifted. Xerox calculated the vector error, the momentum that would carry a disabled ship across light years of empty space. The numbers placed the colony's arrival in this system within possible parameters, though the probability registered as statistically insignificant. Survival here should have been impossible. The planet's thin atmosphere and minimal magnetic field offered negligible protection from solar radiation. Yet the colonists hadn't just survived. They'd thrived in the most brutal sense. The settlement maps revealed their strategy: concentrated development across the southern hemisphere's mountainous regions, with northern territories left entirely unexplored. Defensive placements covered every approach, energy signatures indicating underground facilities spanning entire mountain ranges. This wasn't haphazard colonization, this was deliberate fortification. They'd chosen their ground with military precision, sacrificing expansion for defensibility. Xerox accessed the early logs. The first years showed standard colony establishment procedures: habitat construction, resource extraction, agricultural development. Then the entries changed. The logs began reporting security incidents, then containment breaches, then mass casualty events. The language shifted from scientific observation to military reporting. Colony governance transformed into chain of command. Civilian structures gave way to martial law. The terminal screen showed population distribution charts. The colonists hadn't expanded their territory in 50 years. Instead, they dug deeper, built stronger, fortified existing positions. Their technology showed rapid militarization, energy weapons developed from mining equipment, defensive shields adapted from atmospheric generators. Every innovation served protection, not progress. Xerox heard the guard's returning footsteps. He erased his access trail and resumed his restrained position as the door opened. The science officer now understood they weren't dealing with lost settlers. These were survivors of something terrible, hardened by generations of fighting an enemy the Confederation had never detected. Their hospitality wasn't distrust, it was operational security, honed through experience. The Artemis hadn't found a new home. It had found a battlefield, and its children had been born into a war they never chose. Xerox covert scans painted a terrifying picture of planetary-scale militarization. The southern hemisphere contained layer upon layer of defensive networks covering entire continents, each system overlapping and reinforcing the others. Energy signatures showed massive subsurface installations running deep beneath mountain ranges. What appeared as natural geological formations were actually hardened weapon emplacements and command centers. The infrastructure followed no pattern of civilian development. Every structure served defense, every road facilitated military movement, every energy grid prioritized weapon systems over living comforts. The northern territories told the story of deliberate sacrifice. Scans showed abandoned settlements, their ruins left standing as a buffer zone. The humans hadn't lost those lands. They'd surrendered them to create defensible boundaries. Vast plains stood empty between the abandoned north and fortified south, creating killing fields where any approaching threat would be exposed. Thermal imaging detected automated defense systems throughout the dead zone, lying dormant until activated by intrusion. The colony hadn't expanded its territory in generations, choosing instead to deepen and strengthen what they already held. Surface-to-orbit defense platforms rose from mountain peaks, their targeting arrays constantly scanning the skies. Power readings indicated these weapons remained at ready status, their energy capacitors holding charge for immediate firing solutions. Xerox recognized Confederation technology in their design, but modified for enhanced yield and faster recharge cycles. The modifications showed generations of field testing and combat refinement. These weren't theoretical weapons, they were systems that had been used, improved, and used again. Underground facilities housed the true scale of their operation. Population centers extended kilometers beneath the surface, connected by reinforced transit tunnels that could be sealed into independent fortresses. Life support systems showed redundant backups capable of sustaining the population through years of siege. Manufacturing facilities produced weapons and ammunition instead of consumer goods. Educational modules recovered from their network showed children learning weapon maintenance at age 6, tactical theory by age 10, and combat engineering by adolescence. History and science studies focused exclusively on military applications and threat analysis. Their technology reflected this singular focus. Medical bays prioritized trauma surgery and biological warfare countermeasures over general health care. Agricultural production emphasized high-calorie survival rations rather than varied nutrition. Even their energy distribution network showed combat adaptations, decentralized power sources that could operate independently if sections of the grid fell. Every aspect of their society had been optimized for one purpose: enduring sustained attack. The colony's development showed 3 centuries of uninterrupted garrison duty. They hadn't built a civilization. They'd constructed a permanent wartime footing. Population records indicated controlled growth rates aligned with resource availability under siege conditions. Cultural archives contained military manuals instead of art, tactical simulations instead of entertainment. Their entire existence revolved around maintaining readiness for a threat that never diminished, a war that never ended. This wasn't a settlement that had militarized in response to danger. It was a war machine that had developed just enough civilian infrastructure to sustain its combat capabilities. The humans of Artemis hadn't found a new home. They'd built a fortress and called it survival. General Parker stood before the strategic display, his finger tracing the northern territories lost 3 generations earlier. His briefing contained no speculation, only casualty reports and tactical assessments filed by commanders long dead. The enemy had no official designation in Confederation databases because the Confederation had never encountered them. The colonists called them the Swarm. 27 years after landing, the first biological containers fell from orbit. Not weapons in the conventional sense, more like seed pods designed to breach atmosphere and release their payload upon impact. The initial reports described them as environmental anomalies, then biological hazards, then coordinated attacks. The swarm didn't invade like soldiers. They consumed like a force of nature, rewriting the ecosystem to suit their biology. They attacked the northern agricultural zones first. Vast farmlands became breeding grounds for swarm organisms that dismantled human technology and incorporated it into their own structures. Early attempts to fight them with conventional weapons failed. The swarm adapted within engagements, developing counters to explosives, energy weapons, and tactical maneuvers. They learned from every battle, evolving not over generations but during single campaigns. Northern settlements fell within 5 years. The colonists conducted fighting retreats, sacrificing territory to buy time for southern fortifications. They sealed mountain passes, flooded valleys, and created the dead zone that now separated the factions. The retreat wasn't defeat. It was strategic contraction to defensible positions. Every meter of abandoned land became part of their defensive strategy. The swarm's most terrifying capability emerged as the conflict continued: technological assimilation. They didn't just use captured equipment, they improved it. Confederation-designed mining lasers reappeared as more efficient cutting tools. Communication arrays were repurposed into jamming networks. Human tactical databases were absorbed and used against their creators. The enemy wasn't just fighting, they were learning everything about their opponents and adapting in real time. Humanity's war transformed from territorial defense to species survival. They weren't trying to reclaim lost lands. They were maintaining a stalemate against an enemy that grew stronger with every engagement. Battle strategies focused on containment rather than victory. Tactics emphasized minimizing swarm access to technology and biomass. The entire southern fortress existed to deny the enemy resources while preserving human existence. The Confederation's arrival threatened this precarious balance. The Luminara's technology represented a massive potential resource for the swarm. Their advanced systems could be assimilated and turned against the colony. Their presence introduced new variables into a conflict that had settled into predictable patterns. General Parker's forces hadn't detained the Confederation crew out of hostility. They were containing a potential catastrophe. The briefing room displays showed current front lines. Swarm formations shifted constantly, testing defenses and seeking weaknesses. Human forces responded with coordinated fire patterns designed to minimize technological exposure. Every engagement was calculated to deny the enemy learning opportunities. This wasn't war as the Confederation understood it. This was a perpetual battle against an enemy that treated conflict as an evolutionary process. Parker's final assessment carried the weight of generations. They don't want our territory. They want our biology, our technology, our adaptive capabilities. They consume, they evolve, they continue. Your arrival isn't rescue, it's dinner bell. And if we don't handle this correctly, your ship becomes their next evolutionary leap. The screen showed real-time swarm movements along the perimeter, constant probing attacks that served as both threat and education. The enemy was always watching, always learning, always adapting. The single swarm entity moved forward under a white cloth held aloft on a biological extension. Human snipers maintained targeting solutions while officers watched through stabilized scopes. Never in 3 centuries of conflict had the swarm attempted communication beyond battle signals. Their movements usually meant attack patterns, encirclement maneuvers, assault formations. This advance showed different purpose: slow, deliberate, with clear, non-threatening posture. It stopped at the designated neutral point, its form shifting to display what humans recognized as data interface points. The universal translator picked up structured clicks and gestural patterns, converting them into fragmented concepts. The entity identified itself as guardian of boundaries, a designation that meant nothing to human intelligence files. Its first coherent message reshaped the entire conflict. We are refugees too. The Guardian's data stream showed a threat beyond human comprehension. Harvesters, planet-consuming entities that moved between systems, stripping worlds bare of all resources. The swarm hadn't invaded Artemis for conquest. They were fleeing extinction themselves. Their conflict with humans was defensive positioning, securing resources needed for their own survival against the true enemy. Tactical displays updated with harvester movement patterns. The entities were approaching the system, drawn by the prolonged conflict's energy signatures. Guardian's projections showed both human and swarm forces annihilated within standard time measurements if they continued fighting each other. The data included harvester engagement profiles, their adaptability to conventional weapons, their consumption rates, their relentless advance across star systems. General Parker's command staff processed the information in stunned silence. 3 centuries of warfare suddenly reframed as a territorial dispute between refugee species. The swarm's infamous adaptability took on new meaning. It wasn't aggression, but evolutionary desperation. Their ability to incorporate technology became potentially the Alliance's greatest asset, against a foe that outmatched them both. The Guardian continued transmitting, showing how Harvester forces dismantled swarm formations with effortless precision. Their own defensive campaigns had ended in catastrophic losses. Entire hive clusters consumed without resistance. The data included surrender attempts that failed. Harvesters didn't accept surrender, only consumption. Human tactical computers began running simulations incorporating swarm capabilities. The results showed possible survival scenarios if both species combined forces. Swarm tunneling could bypass Harvester perimeter defenses. Their biological warfare systems might disrupt Harvester assimilation processes. Their adaptive communication networks could provide real-time tactical updates across the battlefield. The command center screens displayed the new strategic reality. 2 enemy militaries hardened by generations of warfare now faced a common extinction event. Their battle-tested weapons suddenly looked inadequate against the scale of approaching threat. Their fortified positions seemed temporary against an enemy that consumed planets. Officers who had spent careers studying swarm attack patterns now evaluated their potential as defensive partners. The very adaptability that made them terrifying enemies could make them invaluable allies. Their biological weapon systems offered possibilities no Confederation technology could match. Guardian maintained its position, awaiting response. The white cloth remained raised, a symbol neither species had used before this moment. The battlefield quiet held new tension, not the silence before attack but the stillness of reevaluation. Centuries of hatred faced irrelevance against a threat that recognized no factions, no sides, only consumable resources. The war room displays shifted from red enemy markers to potential blue alliance indicators. Military planners who had dedicated their lives to destroying the swarm now calculated how to integrate their capabilities. The transition wasn't philosophical, it was mathematical survival calculus. Enemy became potential ally under the shadow of galactic extinction. Guardian's tactical data painted something beyond conventional warfare. Harvesters consumed planets entirely, operating on a galactic scale that defied human or swarm comprehension. Their process followed no recognizable military objectives. They simply took, absorbed, and moved to the next system, leaving dead worlds behind. The translated description struggled to convey the horror. Entities that treated civilizations as resources, ecosystems as consumables, technology as raw material. Artemis logs confirmed Earth's hidden history. The generation ships weren't launched for exploration. They fled approaching extinction. Harvester precursors had been detected nearing Earth's system, their trajectory indicating inevitable arrival. Humanity's expansion represented desperation, not ambition. Pathfinder and Horizon likely fell during transit, their fate unknown but presumed fatal based on Harvester movement patterns. The Artemis survived through miscalculation. A navigational error during course correction sent them off planned trajectory, accidentally placing them in a system the Harvesters hadn't yet reached. Their 3-century isolation wasn't misfortune, it was inadvertent sanctuary. The prolonged conflict with the swarm now revealed its terrible cost. Continuous energy signatures had drawn Harvester attention toward the system. Current projections showed the lead elements approaching within standard time measurements. Their advanced patterns indicated systematic scanning, methodical consumption of outer system resources. The true war wasn't human versus swarm. It was organized life versus consumption on a cosmic scale. Both species faced annihilation from an enemy that recognized no surrender, no negotiation, only utilization. Guardian provided engagement profiles from other systems. Harvester forces employed phase-shifting technology that made them appear as ghosts on sensors. They adapted to weapons within engagements, developing counters faster than species could innovate. Their capital-class units, designated behemoths, carried planet-killing capabilities. One such unit had destroyed the swarm's homeworld. The data showed Harvesters hunting survivors across star systems. Their persistence suggested long-term strategic tracking rather than random consumption. Energy signatures from prolonged conflict served as beacons drawing their attention. The Artemis system now glowed on their sensors like a signal fire in dark space. Human and swarm tactical computers ran joint simulations. Conventional defenses failed within standard time measurements. Combined forces showed marginally improved survival rates, but only if integrated before harvester arrival. Their window for preparation was closing with each movement cycle. The alliance became mathematical necessity rather than philosophical choice. Survival required utilizing swarm adaptability against harvester evolution, human resilience against relentless consumption, Confederation technology against phase-shifting capabilities. No single species possessed adequate defenses. Only combined strengths offered any possibility of resistance. General Parker reviewed the updated strategic displays. Northern territories showed increased harvester scout activity. Their probes tested perimeter defenses, analyzing response patterns. Each engagement provided them with tactical data for main force adaptation. The command center's atmosphere shifted from planning to countdown. Preparations that seemed theoretical became immediate operational requirements. The true scale of threat redefined priorities. Fortress world strategies designed against the swarm appeared inadequate against planet-consuming entities. Underground facilities might delay but not prevent consumption. Victory required stopping them before they reached atmosphere, before they could access the planet's resources. Xerox monitored approaching energy signatures. The harvesters moved with inexorable progress, their course unaltering. Their technology surpassed Confederation understanding, their capabilities exceeding worst-case projections. The Luminara's sensors provided additional tracking data, confirming Guardian's warnings. The system's time of isolation had ended. The galaxy's true predators had arrived. Xerox's team faced communication barriers that went beyond linguistic differences. The swarm employed clicks, whistles, and intricate appendage movements, their language a complex interplay of biological signals. The universal translator, designed for verbal languages, failed to interpret movement patterns and sensory emissions. Standard translation protocols assumed shared cognitive frameworks. These species had none. They began with mathematical sequences. Primes, pi, Fibonacci, numbers that transcended biology and culture. The Luminara broadcast these patterns through multiple channels, visual displays, audio frequencies, energy pulses. The swarm's response came not in numbers but in coordinated biological patterns. Light emissions pulsed in golden ratios. Organic structures arranged themselves in geometric perfection. Movement sequences mirrored the mathematical concepts. Human operators contributed tactical data through visual mapping. They projected battle formations, threat assessments, and historical records using schematic displays. The swarm responded with their own tactical information, harvester engagement patterns, adaptation rates, consumption timelines. The exchange became a visual dialogue where graphs and symbols replaced words. The universal recalibrated to interpret movement as language, light patterns as syntax, pheromone releases as emphasis. It learned to read context from biological responses, translating intent rather than vocabulary. Communication became a constant process of verification and adjustment. A swarm gesture might mean warning or welcome depending on ambient energy levels. A human schematic required multiple viewings to convey full meaning. They developed a functional battle language within standard hours. Simple commands, hold position, advance, target designation. Complex concepts required layered communication. Mathematical sequences combined with tactical displays reinforced by biological signals. The system wasn't elegant but functional, built for urgency rather than perfection. Understanding emerged through shared survival imperative rather than linguistic mastery. All three species recognized attack patterns, defensive needs, resource limitations. A swarm defensive formation communicated more through its positioning than any translation. A human weapon schematic conveyed capability through its design parameters. Confederation sensor data showed threat assessment through energy readings. The translation protocols expanded to include emotional context. Swarm alarm pheromones translated as urgency indicators, human stress responses registered as priority signals. Confederation physiological readings became reliability markers. The system learned to interpret what species felt, not just what they attempted to say. Joint tactical exercises tested the communication framework. Swarm units responded to human movement commands, Human forces adapted to swarm biological signals. Confederation systems integrated both data streams into cohesive battle plans. Misunderstandings occurred. A retreat signal misinterpreted as flanking maneuver. A defensive pattern read as attack formation. Each error refined the translation matrices. The communication breakthrough transformed strategic planning. Swarm adaptability could now be directed through human tactical insight, enhanced by Confederation technology. Real-time coordination became possible despite biological differences. The Alliance developed shared shorthand, specific light patterns for specific threats, mathematical sequences for resource allocation, movement codes for unit deployment. By the time Harvester Scouts entered detection range, the three species could coordinate basic operations. Their communication wasn't perfect, but it functioned under pressure. The translation systems continued learning during engagements, adapting to combat stress and rapid developments. What began as mathematical sequences had become a living language of survival, forged in the certainty of approaching conflict. 3 centuries of conflict reduced to a single plateau under gray skies. Human and Confederation forces held defensive positions along the western ridge. Weapons trained on the eastern approach. Swarm delegates moved across the open ground with precise measured movements. Their forms shifted in the harsh wind, biological adaptations adjusting to the thin atmosphere. The neutral ground between them represented more than territory. It was a test of whether ancient enemies could share space without violence. The swarm entity designated Guardian of Boundaries advanced alone, its appendages holding a biological data drive. Xerox team broadcast prime number sequences from their position, the mathematical patterns flashing across portable displays. The swarm responded with coordinated light emissions from its surface, patterns matching the Fibonacci sequence. The universal translator struggled with the complex exchange, producing fragmented interpretations: threat, vector, numbers, containment. Lieutenant Reeves moved forward at General Parker's signal, her steps careful across the rocky terrain. She maintained visual contact with both the swarm delegate and her own snipers. Her hand remained near her sidearm, but her posture showed protocol compliance rather than combat readiness. The data drive pulsed with soft biological light, where Guardian had placed it on a flat rock. The distance between them measured less than 10 meters, the closest any human had approached a swarm entity without firing weapons. Reeves reached the rock, her gloves closing around the organic data container. It felt warm, slightly vibrating with contained energy. She raised it slowly, signaling successful retrieval to her command post. Guardian remained motionless, its light patterns shifting to steady amber pulses. The translator interpreted, transfer complete. Alliance confirmed. For that moment, the plateau held only the wind and the fragile possibility of trust. Then the sky tore open. 3 Harvester scout craft descended through the atmosphere, their phase-shifted hulls shimmering into visibility. They fired without warning, energy beams scorching the ground between human and swarm positions. Reeves dropped behind the rock, the data drive clutched to her chest. Sniper teams opened fire on the crafts, their rounds impacting without visible effect. Guardian moved faster than human eyes could track. It positioned itself between the harvester beams and Reeves's position, its form expanding into an energy shield that absorbed the incoming fire. The shield glowed with intense blue light, its surface rippling with the impact. Guardian maintained the protection despite obvious strain, its biological systems overheating from the energy dissipation. Human forces redirected fire to cover the swarm entity. Confederation energy weapons provided suppressing fire against the harvester craft. The Alliance fought its first engagement, not as separate forces but as coordinated units. Reeves scrambled back to friendly lines under Guardian's protection, the data drive secure in her grip. The harvester craft withdrew after standard engagement time, their reconnaissance complete. The plateau fell silent again, but everything had changed. Guardian's shield retracted slowly, its form showing visible damage from the energy absorption. Human medics advanced cautiously, medkits in hand, though no one knew if swarm biology could accept their aid. General Parker watched from the command post, his earlier doubts replaced by grim acceptance. Enemies didn't protect each other. They didn't sacrifice their own safety for opposing forces. That single act of protection rewrote 3 centuries of conflict in 10 seconds of combat. The data drive contained tactical information, but the real message had been written in energy shields and defensive positioning. The harvesters had done what diplomacy couldn't. They'd made allies out of enemies by showing them what true predation looked like. General Parker's command center transformed into a three-way strategic nightmare. The hybrid war room housed representatives from species that had been killing each other hours earlier. Human tactical officers stood beside Confederation specialists, while swarm entities occupied specially modified environmental stations. The atmosphere held the tension of a ceasefire that could shatter with one misinterpreted gesture. They weren't allies yet. They were desperate forces sharing space while the real enemy approached. Human intuition clashed with swarm adaptability at every planning session. Human commanders proposed defensive fortress tactics refined through centuries of warfare. Swarm representatives responded with biological warfare concepts that made human officers visibly uncomfortable. Confederation specialists interjected with technological solutions that ignored practical battlefield conditions. The translation system struggled with concepts that had no equivalent across species. A human holding action meant something entirely different to swarm tactical philosophy. The swarm demonstrated their biological warfare capabilities through tactical displays. They showed how specialized organisms could disrupt harvester energy systems, something conventional weapons failed to accomplish. Human engineers watched with grim fascination as the presentation revealed weapons previously used against their own forces. The same adaptability that made the swarm terrifying enemies now offered potential salvation. Confederation sensors provided detailed analysis of each capability's effectiveness against harvester defenses. Guardian of Boundaries mediated between conflicting tactical philosophies. The entity translated swarm movement patterns into human strategic concepts, then explained Confederation technology limitations to both sides. Its presence prevented several potential breakdowns when cultural misunderstandings threatened cooperation. The war room developed a crude but functional communication protocol using mathematical sequences for resource allocation and tactical symbols for unit deployment. They designed phase disruption weaponry by combining human manufacturing capabilities with swarm biological components and Confederation energy technology. Human workshops produced delivery systems based on swarm anatomical designs. Swarm organisms were modified to carry Confederation energy disruptors. The resulting weapons looked like nightmares but showed promising results against simulated harvester defenses. Each test firing provided data for rapid improvements across all three technological systems. Battle plans incorporated swarm tunneling capabilities for surprise attacks behind harvester lines. Human fortifications provided fallback positions and defensive strongpoints. Confederation ships offered aerial support and sensor coverage across the entire battlefield. The coordination required constant adjustment as each species learned the other's operational limitations and strengths. Swarm units needed different support than human squads. Confederation ships required modified communication protocols for biological allies. The Alliance operated as a desperate patchwork of incompatible systems, forced to function under extreme pressure. Tactical meetings extended through multiple sleep cycles as planners worked through fundamental disagreements about engagement philosophy. Human commanders preferred decisive battles. Swarm tactics emphasized prolonged adaptation. Confederation doctrine called for technological superiority. They compromised by assigning each species to roles that matched their capabilities against specific harvester weaknesses. Victory required using swarm adaptability against harvester evolution, human resilience against relentless assault, and Confederation technology against phase-shifting capabilities. The war room developed engagement scenarios that played to each species' strengths while minimizing their weaknesses. Swarm forces would handle rapid adaptation during battles. Human troops would maintain defensive positions under sustained attack. Confederation ships would provide sensor intelligence and precision strikes. The planning sessions revealed unexpected synergies. Swarm tunneling teams could place Confederation sensor arrays behind enemy lines. Human fortifications provided stable platforms for swarm biological warfare emplacements. Confederation energy weapons enhanced swarm adaptive capabilities when properly integrated. The three species began developing combined tactics that none could have conceived independently. Their very differences becoming advantages against an enemy that expected conventional warfare. By the time Harvester advance units reached engagement range, The hybrid war room had produced workable battle plans. The strategies weren't elegant and contained numerous potential failure points, but they represented the best possible integration of three conflicting combat philosophies. General Parker reviewed the final deployment orders, his approval meaning that centuries of warfare would now be tested against a common enemy. The alliance was ready, or as ready as such a makeshift cooperation could be. Rivera's voice cut through the strategic debate with a suggestion that silenced the war room. The mining shuttles used minimal electronics, making them resistant to harvester interference. Their drive cores could be overloaded into catastrophic detonations. The plan required hitting the behemoth's energy core with precise timing and navigation that bordered on impossible. One shuttle, one pilot, one chance to deliver a killing blow where conventional weapons failed. Human engineers modified a Dragonfly-class shuttle for its final mission. They stripped everything non-essential, reinforcing the hull around the drive core. The overload sequence would trigger on impact, turning the entire vessel into a focused explosive device. Confederation specialists enhanced the payload with phase disruption technology, increasing its ability to penetrate harvester defenses. Swarm biological systems provided organic guidance resistant to electronic warfare, their living components operating on principles harvesters couldn't counter. The mission parameters showed why no automated system could attempt it. The approach required flying through mountain updrafts to clear the blast radius, a navigation problem that demanded human intuition and split-second adjustments. The pilot would need to maintain course through harvester countermeasures that disrupted sensors and targeting systems. Success probability registered at 17%, and that assumed perfect execution against an enemy that adapted during engagements. Rivera requested the assignment himself. His family died in the Northern Territories during swarm attacks years earlier. His voice held no vengeance, only certainty. This wasn't about revenge, it was about preventing the same fate for every remaining family in the southern fortress. His sacrifice would serve as redemption for surviving when others hadn't, and as military necessity for those who remained. General Parker approved the operation without ceremony. The Alliance command confirmed moments later. Sometimes victory required burning your own ships, sacrificing one to save the fleet. The modified shuttle waited in its launch bay, a patchwork of human, Confederation, and swarm technologies fused into a single-purpose weapon. Rivera conducted his pre-flight check with methodical precision, ignoring the finality of each action. Swarm forces prepared their diversion. They would attack from multiple angles using their most powerful biological weapons, drawing harvester attention and defensive fire. The coordinated assault might create the necessary window for Rivera's approach. Human ground units would reinforce defensive lines, preventing harvester forces from interfering with the operation. Confederation ships provided sensor coverage and communication relays through the jamming fields. The Dragonfly launched into thin atmosphere, its engines burning toward the behemoth's position. Rivera's voice remained calm through the comms, reporting navigation points and system status. Harvester defensive fire began immediately, energy beams missing the small craft by narrow margins. The shuttle weaved through incoming fire, its organic guidance systems compensating for sensor disruption. Rivera adjusted course to use mountain updrafts, gaining altitude without engine signature. The maneuver showed why human pilots remained essential. No automated system could read wind patterns while under fire. The behemoth's energy core glowed ahead, protected by layered defenses. Swarm diversion attacks reached their peak, drawing defensive fire away from the approach vector. The shuttle entered its final descent, engines burning at maximum thrust. Rivera's final transmission confirmed target acquisition and trigger activation. The impact registered as a brilliant flash against the behemoth's hull, followed by the detonation sequence. The Dragonfly ceased to exist. Its components transformed into focused destructive energy. The explosion tore through harvester defenses, reaching the energy core where conventional weapons had failed. Silence followed across all channels. Sensor feeds showed the behemoth systems failing in cascading failures. The sacrifice achieved what three species' combined forces could not: a decisive blow against an enemy that outmatched them technologically. The Alliance had learned its first lesson in cooperative warfare. Sometimes the oldest weapons work best when handled with enough courage. The harvesters hit all three forces simultaneously, their attack patterns showing precise understanding of Alliance vulnerabilities. Human fortifications along the southern ridges absorbed the initial assault. Energy weapons firing in coordinated volleys developed through centuries of siege warfare. Soldiers held positions their grandparents had defended, their movements refined by generations fighting from these same defensive lines. They created stable firing platforms while swarm forces moved through underground networks. Swarm units emerged behind harvester advance elements, their biological weapons disrupting enemy formations. They used tunneling capabilities to bypass main assault forces, attacking from angles the harvesters hadn't secured. Their tactics created confusion in enemy ranks, forcing harvester units to divide attention between frontal assault and rear security. The swarm's adaptive combat style countered harvester evolution in real time, their biological systems developing counters during engagements. Confederation ships provided overwatch from high atmosphere, their sensors mapping the entire battlefield. The Luminara relayed targeting data to ground forces, her systems identifying harvester weaknesses as they developed. Energy weapons fired precision strikes against high-value targets, disrupting enemy command and control. The ships created communication networks that bypassed harvester jamming attempts, maintaining contact between dispersed Alliance units. The hybrid war room coordinated the three-front battle in real time. General Parker's command staff worked beside swarm tactical specialists and Confederation officers. The Universal Translator converted movement patterns into tactical data, biological signals into deployment orders. Decisions happened faster than traditional command structures allowed, the system processing multiple combat philosophies into cohesive responses. Human resilience provided the defensive anchor. Their fortress tactics absorbed harvester pressure, while swarm and Confederation forces exploited openings. The harvesters couldn't break through established defensive lines that had withstood centuries of warfare. Human commanders adjusted formations based on real-time intelligence from Confederation sensors and swarm scout reports. Swarm adaptability countered harvester biological weapons that would have overwhelmed other forces. Their own evolutionary capabilities matched the enemy's rapid adaptation, creating a biological arms race within the larger conflict. Swarm units developed counters to new harvester tactics within engagement cycles, their responses integrated into alliance planning through the war room. Confederation technology disrupted harvester energy systems and communication networks. Phase disruption weapons interfered with enemy coordination, creating windows for counterattacks. Sensor networks tracked harvester movements despite their phase-shifting capabilities, denying them the advantage of stealth. The technological edge compensated for biological disadvantages against the evolving threat. The Alliance fought as separate forces operating in perfect coordination rather than a unified army. Each species employed its specialized capabilities against specific harvester weaknesses. The harvesters faced 3 different combat methodologies simultaneously, their adaptive systems overwhelmed by conflicting tactical approaches. What worked against human defenses failed against swarm biology. What countered swarm tactics proved useless against Confederation technology. Their differences became strategic advantages. The Harvester's single adaptive strategy couldn't counter 3 separate combat philosophies operating in concert. The Alliance leveraged each species' unique strengths while mitigating their individual weaknesses through cooperation. The battle demonstrated that sometimes the best defense isn't unity, but coordinated diversity against a singular threat. The mining shuttle accelerated through heavy defensive fire, its modified hull absorbing energy impacts that would have destroyed standard craft. Rivera maintained course toward the behemoth's energy core, his hand steady on the controls despite multiple system failures. Navigation systems flickered under harvester interference, their readings becoming unreliable within the target's energy field. The shuttle weaved through incoming fire, its path erratic but deliberate. Swarm biological guidance systems activated as conventional navigation failed. Organic components integrated into the control systems responded to harvester countermeasures with adaptive patterns. The shuttle's course corrections became more fluid, its movements unpredictable to enemy targeting. The living guidance system compensated for damaged equipment, maintaining trajectory through methods harvesters couldn't anticipate or disrupt. Confederation ships created temporary corridors through defensive screens. Their coordinated attacks drew harvester attention away from the shuttle's approach vector. Energy weapons targeted point defense systems that threatened the mining craft's path. The Luminara provided real-time targeting data, her sensors tracking the shuttle's progress through interference fields. Each ship sacrificed defensive positioning to maintain the attack corridor. Human ground forces launched diversionary assaults along the northern front. Their attacks appeared as full-scale offensive operations, drawing harvester ground units into defensive engagements. The holding actions required sustaining casualties to maintain the illusion of major assault. Soldiers advanced against overwhelming firepower, their sacrifice creating the necessary distraction for the shuttle's final approach. The impact came without detonation. The shuttle struck the behemoth's core section, its reinforced prow penetrating deep into energy channels. Silence followed for 3 critical seconds. Rivera's final transmission confirmed manual override activation. His voice remained calm as he disabled all safety protocols, ensuring maximum yield at point-blank range. The explosion began internally, a contained reaction that built pressure within the core. The modified drive core created a miniature sun within the behemoth's energy systems. The detonation cascaded through power channels, overloading systems never designed to handle such internal stress. Containment fields failed sequentially as the energy wave expanded outward. Structural collapse initiated at the impact point. Support frameworks buckled under energy overloads, their integrity compromised by the internal detonation. The behemoth's outer hull showed visible stress fractures spreading from the core section. Internal explosions followed the energy wave through vital systems, each failure accelerating the collapse process. The sacrifice achieved the impossible. Conventional weapons had failed against the behemoth's defenses for one simple reason: they attacked from outside. Rivera's shuttle delivered its payload internally, bypassing defensive systems entirely. The explosion worked from within, using the behemoth's own energy channels against it. The Alliance had turned the enemy's strength into its vulnerability. Surviving sensors showed the behemoth breaking apart, its structural integrity failing across multiple sectors. The massive craft began drifting, its systems darkening section by section. The victory came at the exact cost predicted: 1 shuttle, 1 pilot, 1 chance taken against overwhelming odds. The Alliance had learned that sometimes the oldest military principles still applied. The best defense against a fortress is to breach it from within. The battlefield fell silent, leaving a landscape shaped by 3 species sacrifices. Human casualties numbered 243, their names added to the memorial walls that already held generations of the fallen. Swarm losses remained uncounted. Their biological warfare units had dissolved into the terrain, leaving only empty positions where warriors had fought. The Confederation ships sustained damage but no losses, their participation carefully limited to supporting roles. The cost distributed unevenly across the Alliance, each species paying differently for shared survival. Rivera's sacrifice became legend across all 3 cultures. The humans created new metals bearing the mining shuttle's silhouette. The swarm incorporated his final transmission into their memory songs, the words echoing through their tunnel networks. The Confederation added his name to their first contact archives as an example of interspecies cooperation. His act represented the Alliance's core truth: sometimes victory requires one person to pay everyone's price. The Harvester mothership retreated beyond sensor range, but intelligence projections suggested it would return. Scans showed it regrouping, repairing damage, learning from the engagement. The victory wasn't permanent. It was a temporary reprieve bought with blood and sacrifice. The southern fortress remained standing, but its defensive capabilities were severely weakened. 3 centuries of fortifications had been damaged beyond immediate repair. The Alliance held through mutual necessity rather than trust. Human and swarm forces maintained separate positions, their interactions limited to tactical coordination. Confederation officers remained aboard their ships, reluctant to establish permanent ground presence. The cooperation that had felt inevitable under fire now seemed fragile without immediate threat. Centuries of warfare couldn't be erased by one battle, no matter how decisive. Swarm memory songs echoed through human trenches at night, their complex patterns honoring the fallen of both species. The meaning was lost in translation, but the respect was clear. Humans responded with their own traditions, reading names of the dead over comms during designated remembrance periods. The rituals recognized that sacrifice transcended species boundaries, even if understanding remained incomplete. The victory left psychological scars across all forces. Human soldiers who had fought swarm formations for generations now relied on them for protection. Swarm warriors adjusted to fighting beside creatures they had been bred to consume. Confederation crews faced the reality that their non-interference policies had allowed this threat to grow unchecked. Each species carried away different traumas from the same battle. General Parker reviewed the after-action reports in his command bunker. The numbers showed a military victory, but the cost columns told a different story. Survival had demanded unity, but that unity came at a price no strategic planning could have anticipated. The Alliance had saved the colony, but it had also changed everyone involved. They weren't the same forces that had entered the battle. They were something new, something forged in desperation and loss. The harvesters would return. That certainty hung over the reconstruction efforts. Every repaired defense position, every replaced weapon, every trained replacement soldier served as preparation for the next engagement. The battle had been won, but the war continued. The cost of victory wasn't just measured in casualties. It was measured in permanent readiness, in eternal vigilance, in knowing that survival meant constant preparation for the next attack. The Alliance had bought time, not peace, and everyone understood the difference. Sirach's analysis of the Artemis logs revealed a fundamental misunderstanding at the heart of Confederation policy. The generation ships weren't launched from Earth for exploration or expansion. They were desperate attempts to escape approaching extinction. Captain Eleanor Frost's emergency recording laid bare the truth. Hyperspace drive beyond repair. Returning to Earth impossible, God help us, we are on our own. These weren't the words of pioneers seeking new worlds, but refugees accepting permanent exile to avoid annihilation. The Confederation's star maps confirmed the horrifying pattern. Harvester activity spread through the sector in a clear advance pattern, their path intersecting with the Artemis's original trajectory. The other generation ships, Pathfinder and Horizon, likely fell to these same forces during transit. Their disappearances weren't navigation errors but casualties in a silent war humanity had been fighting for centuries. Earth itself now lay in the projected path of Harvester expansion, its fate potentially mirroring the Artemis colony's northern territories. Human expansion across the galaxy represented desperation, not ambition. The Confederation had interpreted their rapid colonization as aggressive territorial acquisition, when in reality, it was a scattered flight from an existential threat. Their militarization wasn't preparation for conquest. It was survival instinct hardened through generations of fighting an enemy that offered no quarter. The southern fortress wasn't a military base. It was a last-stand position established by refugees who knew what followed them. The policy of non-interference had allowed this threat to grow unchecked. While the Confederation observed protocols and documented first contact procedures, the harvesters consumed system after system. Their advance went unopposed because no centralized authority recognized the pattern of disappearances and destroyed worlds. The Artemis colonists had fought alone for 3 centuries against an enemy the entire galaxy should have been monitoring. Sirach compared the Artemis's technology with current Confederation databases. The colony's defenses showed clear evolution from standard human systems, but adapted exclusively for combat effectiveness. Every innovation served survival, not quality of life. Their educational focused on threat response and weapons maintenance, because those were the only skills that maintained existence. Children learned battlefield medicine before basic science because the former kept people alive. The galaxy's understanding of human nature required complete revision. Their perceived aggression was trauma response. Their territorial expansion was desperate migration. Their military readiness was permanent siege mentality. The Confederation had spent centuries fearing human ambition when they should have been studying human resilience. The Artemis colony hadn't just survived impossible odds. They'd developed strategies that might save the entire sector. General Parker reviewed the updated threat assessments. Earth's current situation mirrored the Artemis's position generations earlier. The same enemy approached. The same desperate choices would be considered. The Confederation's non-interference policy now seemed like criminal negligence in light of the evidence. They had watched humanity expand without understanding why, documenting their movements while missing the danger that drove them. The Artemis logs contained one final revelation. The colonists had detected harvester movements years before the first attack. Their preparations hadn't been paranoid. They'd been precisely measured responses to verified threats. The southern fortress was built with exact knowledge of what was coming, not vague fears of potential danger. Their militarization represented calculated survival strategy, not uncontrolled aggression. Xerox closed the archives with newfound respect for human perseverance. They hadn't just survived a navigational error and hostile environment. They'd maintained a 3-century holding action against an enemy that consumed planets, adapting and evolving while receiving no support from the wider galaxy. Their existence was a testament to what desperate creatures could achieve when extinction was the only alternative. The command center housed the most unlikely strategic debate in galactic history. 3 species that had been trying to kill each other weeks earlier now argued over permanent cohabitation. The system's strategic value was undeniable. It represented the forwardmost position against harvester advance patterns. Human defensive expertise combined with swarm adaptability and Confederation technology created a defensive matrix no single species could replicate. The alliance could serve as both deterrent and early warning system for the entire sector. General Parker supported the presence without hesitation. His assessment focused on military necessity over political considerations. The southern fortress offered established infrastructure, while the northern territories provided buffer space. Swarm tunneling networks created mobility advantages, and Confederation technology enhanced existing defenses. The location became objectively ideal for monitoring harvester movements and responding to incursions. Guardian of Boundaries agreed to maintain swarm forces in the region. The entity's reasoning followed strategic logic rather than emotional reconciliation. Swarm adaptability would be most effective against harvesters when supported by human resilience and Confederation sensors. Their biological warfare capabilities required the manufacturing capacity both other species provided. The cooperation made tactical sense despite historical conflicts. Confederation Command authorized continued involvement after intensive debate. Their hesitation reflected institutional reluctance to abandon non-interference policies. The strategic reality overcame philosophical objections. Harvesters threatened all species, not just those in this system. The Luminara would remain as liaison vessel. Her crew transitioned from explorers to permanent observers. Cultural exchange began through military cooperation. Human and swarm forces developed hand signals for basic communication during joint patrols. Confederation specialists created improved translation protocols based on battlefield observations. The exchanges remained practical rather than social. Shared survival necessitated functional understanding more than philosophical alignment. The system's transformation followed logical progression. Defensive positions were rebuilt with integrated technologies. Human fortifications incorporated swarm biological components for self-repair capabilities. Confederation sensors were mounted on swarm tunneling units for underground monitoring. Each improvement served military function while accidentally fostering cooperation. The triple fortified bastion took shape across continents. Northern territories became designated engagement zones with pre-positioned defenses. Southern mountains housed combined command centers deep underground. Orbital defenses were upgraded with phase disruption technology developed during the battle. The entire system became a single coordinated defensive platform. The permanent presence changed operational paradigms. Patrols now included mixed species teams. Training exercises incorporated all 3 combat philosophies. Tactical planning sessions required representation from each military tradition. The system operated as a laboratory for interspecies cooperation under combat conditions. General Parker reviewed the final deployment plans. Human forces would maintain fortress defenses using their centuries of experience. Swarm units would handle rapid response and adaptation during engagements. Confederation ships provided sensor coverage and strategic strike capabilities. The division of labor respected each species' strengths while creating interdependence. The bastion stood as warning and promise. Its defenses deterred harvester incursions, while demonstrating that former enemies could unite against common threats. The alliance remained fragile, tested daily by cultural misunderstandings and historical grudges. But the strategic necessity overcame individual conflicts. They had chosen to remain together because separation meant certain defeat. The system became what survival demanded. a permanent reminder that some threats require forgetting old hatreds to face new nightmares. Xerox reviewed the strategic assessments with newfound perspective. The Confederation had feared human expansion for centuries, viewing their rapid colonization as reckless invasion. Their databases categorized humanity as aggressive territorial acquisitors, their military development as preparation for conquest. The reality revealed by Artemis logs showed something entirely different. Not conquerors, but refugees fighting extinction. Their expansion represented flight, not ambition. Their militarization was survival instinct, hardened through generations under threat. The swarm's reclassification followed similar reassessment. Initially perceived as mindless biological weapons, they now stood revealed as refugees themselves. Their attacks against the colony weren't invasion, but desperate securing of resources against the true threat. Their infamous adaptability wasn't aggression, it was evolutionary desperation against an enemy that offered no quarter. Both species had been fighting for survival while misunderstanding each other's motives. The harvesters represented true cosmic predation. They consumed without purpose, absorbed without reason, destroyed without hatred. Their advancement followed patterns of natural disaster rather than military campaign. They weren't conquerors seeking territory or resources in any conventional sense. They were consumption made manifest, a force that treated civilizations as temporary concentrations of usable materials. First contact narratives typically assumed curiosity and mutual discovery. The Artemis encounter demonstrated that reality often involved fear and immediate threat assessment. The Confederation's arrival wasn't met with wonder. It was met with defensive protocols refined through centuries of warfare. The galaxy's dangers weren't about who you encountered, but what those encounters forced you to become. Humanity's transformation showed the cost of survival. Their society had abandoned exploration for fortification, curiosity for vigilance, expansion for defense. The children learning weapon maintenance instead of science represented what prolonged conflict demanded of civilizations. The swarm's own adaptations showed similar transformation, their biology optimized for combat rather than natural. Evolution understanding required stepping back from immediate threats to see broader patterns. The harvester's approach explained behaviors that seemed irrational in isolation. Human militarization, swarm aggression, Confederation non-interference, all made sense when viewed against the true threat moving through the galaxy. The real monsters weren't the species you encountered. They were the forces that turned civilizations into armed camps and refugees into soldiers. The alliance demonstrated that survival sometimes required former enemies to recognize their common predicament. Human and swarm forces now cooperated because they faced something worse than each other. Their historical conflicts seemed almost trivial against the scale of harvester advancement. The galaxy's true danger wasn't conflict between species. It was the external threats that forced species into destructive patterns. Xerox closed the tactical displays. The Confederation's entire framework for evaluating other species required revision. Their classification systems had missed the essential truth that most observed behaviors were responses to unobserved threats. The real lesson of Artemis wasn't about human resilience or swarm adaptability. It was about recognizing that what you see as monstrous behavior might be desperate survival against something truly monstrous. The darkness between stars held more than empty space. It held reflections of what survival demanded of those who lived there. The Luminara's return journey carried a crew fundamentally altered by their encounter. Commander Vine's log entries no longer noted routine systems checks, but reflected on the fragile nature of peaceful assumptions. Xerox spent his shifts revising Confederation first contact protocols, his recommendations grounded in brutal experience. The new procedures emphasized threat assessment alongside diplomatic overtures, recognizing that not all discoveries brought wonder. Some brought war. The Confederation's exploration doctrine underwent significant revision based on the Artemis encounter. First contact protocols now included mandatory defensive positioning and threat evaluation before any cultural exchange. Exploration vessels received upgraded sensor packages designed to detect biological warfare signatures and hidden militarization. The policy of non-interference was amended to allow intervention when planetary-scale threats were identified. These changes reflected hard lessons learned through detention and battle. Human resilience earned new respect within Confederation strategic circles. Xerox analyses highlighted their capacity to endure sustained conflict and adapt technology for survival. Their fortress world strategy demonstrated innovative defensive thinking that Confederation military planners had previously underestimated. The Artemis colonists hadn't just survived impossible odds, they'd developed combat doctrines that changed how the Confederation viewed human military capability. The alliance between humans, Swarm, and Confederation forces demonstrated that survival sometimes required partnerships that defied historical conflicts. Galactic politics began shifting from species-based competition to coordinated response against shared threats. The Artemis system became a model for interspecies cooperation, its triple fortified defenses serving as both military stronghold and diplomatic experiment. The Luminara's crew returned to Confederation space marked by their experience. Their boredom was replaced by professional vigilance, their casual exploration replaced by strategic awareness. They understood now that the darkness between stars held more than empty space. It held reflections of what desperation could create. Their milk run had become a galaxy-changing event that redefined exploration's dangers and responsibilities. The story closed without triumphant celebration. Victory against the Harvesters was temporary, their retreat indicating regrouping rather than defeat. The alliance remained fragile, its cooperation sustained by mutual threat rather than genuine trust. The Confederation's new perspective emphasized readiness over curiosity, defense over discovery. Every unknown system now represented potential danger rather than pure opportunity. Xerox's final assessment captured the changed reality. Resistance and alliance weren't strategic choices. They were necessary responses when facing darkness that consumed worlds. The galaxy's true nature had revealed itself not through peaceful contact, but through shared survival against existential threats. Exploration would continue, but never again with the naive assumption that first contact meant friendly meeting. Sometimes it meant stepping onto a battlefield, and sometimes it meant joining forces with former enemies to face the real monsters. The Luminara moved through space with renewed purpose, her scanners probing the darkness with cautious determination, forever changed by what they had found and what had found them. The galaxy's truths rarely match our assumptions of monsters and heroes. What began as a routine survey mission revealed a fortress built not by conquerors, but survivors. Their weapons weren't aimed at domination, they were raised against extinction. Sometimes discovery means finding what you should have feared all along. The darkness between stars holds more than empty space. It holds reflections of our own survival instincts, the choices civilizations make when facing oblivion. Not all first contacts bring enlightenment. Some reveal that survival demands unlikely alliances, forged not in idealism but necessity.